Alright, talking about communities and ecosystems, let's talk about what is an ecosystem. And you can also go within what are the dynamics, how does it change, the whole dynamics part. So an ecosystem consists of all the organisms in a community and the abiotic environment in which the organisms interact. So the abiotic is the part that's added to the ecosystem. So in an ecosystem, energy flow moves through components of an ecosystem, so it's through. And then we have chemical cycling, which is a transfer of materials within the ecosystem. These are probably ones that you already know. So a terrarium is a really good way of representing the components of an ecosystem and illustrating fundamentals of energy flow. So if you have a terrarium, it's a good one. So like here's an example. We'll say we'll have some light energy, it'll get converted to chemical energy, and plants will, and then little herbivores will come by and eat the food, eat, the sugars in the plant, and then some of that's lost as heat. So it's kind of from one direction, the light energy to the plant, to the little snail, to outside forces that we lose as heat. Chemical cycling is a little bit different. So maybe we've got some bacteria in here, but maybe there's some certain elements like carbon and nitrogen that are just going through this whole system. So carbon, maybe nitrogen. So that's the stuff to think about. So the amount of solar energy converted to chemical energy in organic compounds, which is just compounds that contain carbon, by an ecosystem producers for a given area and during a given time period are called primary production. Okay. Ecologists call the amount or mass of living organic material in the ecosystem the biomass, so the mass of life, so the mass of living organic material. Different ecosystems vary in their primary production and their contribution of total production to the biosphere. Okay. So you can get some of these actually, which is fascinating. We always think of tropical rainforest as being the most productive. But if you actually look at it, it's algal beds and coral reefs that are actually higher than tropical rainforest. So this is a big thing that, we'll maybe discuss just a little bit next time, but the conservation efforts really need to go towards coral reefs and kind of getting that productivity out of them. We don't find a whole lot in the open ocean or deserts or tundras, which should be intuitive. All right, a caterpillar, we saw, represents a primary consumer. The organic compounds a caterpillar ingests, 50% of it is eliminated as feces, or actually for insects we call it frass. That's insect poop. 35% is used for cellular respiration, and 15% is actually converted to biomass. So that's like growth, and how big the little guy gets. Okay. So really, a whole bunch of this kind of organic compounds are lost. Okay, so just to kind of show it, 50% as feces, 15% is used for growth and getting bigger, and then 35% is used for cellular respiration. Okay, so a pyramid of production illustrates the cumulative loss of energy with each transfer in the chain. So hopefully you got a little bit of this going through the owl pellet lab, but only about 10% of the energy stored at each level, each trophic level, or nutrients level, is available at the next level. So the efficiencies of energy transfer range from 5 to 20%. So really on average it's about 10. So this is the idea here, is that if there's 100, oh sorry, wrong thought there, but if there's 1,000,000 kcals of sunlight, only 10,000 will go to producers, only 1,000 to primary consumers, only about 100 to secondary consumers, and only 10 to tertiary consumers. So if you think about our owl all the way up to maybe a quaternary, that's what that was called, it would only receive 1 kcal of energy. So really it's just like, what's the point? So there's not much after that because the energy level really is, that's about where it ends. That's not much you could do with the rest of it. A lot of it's lost as heat along the way. So an important implication of this stepwise decline of energy in trophic structure is that the amount of energy available for top-level consumers is small, okay, compared to what's available for low-level consumers. So only a tiny fraction of the energy stored by photosynthesis flows through a food chain all the way to a tertiary consumer. So this explains why top-level consumers such as lions and hawks require so much geographic territory, because they've got to get a lot of energy. They're only getting a little bit. So as omnivores, people eat plant material and meat. So when humans eat grain or fruit, we are primary consumers. If we eat beef or other meats from herbivores, then we're secondary consumers. If you eat food like fish, if you eat fish like trout or salmon, we're a tertiary or even a quaternary consumer. Okay, so that's the way we range. So only about 10% of the chemical energy available in a trophic level is passed to the next higher trophic level. So the human population is about 10 times more energy available to it than people when people eat plants rather than when people eat meat of herbivores. So it makes sense. So eating meat of any kind is really expensive economically and environmentally. There are a lot of meats, kind of just animal products from herbivores that really isn't environmentally friendly, including cows. Okay, so if we're vegetarians are actually able to get more of that energy, and it seems counterintuitive, but it is so that they're getting more energy than strictly meat eaters. Okay. So ecosystems are supplied with a continual influx of energy from the sun and the Earth's interior. So remember, we've got that hot magma in the Earth, and so it actually creates some heat there as well. So we're getting some energy. Except for meteorites, there really are no extraterrestrial sources of chemical elements. So all life depends on the recycling of those chemicals. We don't get a whole lot of new ones. So these are what we call bio-geochemical cycles. Bio is life, geo is earth, chemical is chemicals. So this is the life-earth chemical cycles. So they've got some biotic components, some abiotic components. There might be some abiotic reservoirs where those chemicals accumulate and are stockpiled. And biogeochemical cycles can be local or at the global level. They can be small scale or really big scale. So sort of looking at it, we'll have like a reservoir. The nutrients will be available to producers. The producers will get it out to consumers and decomposers, and then eventually it'll make its way back. So we'll make our way through this one. If you need to come back to this one as a reference. So carbon is the major ingredient of all organic molecules and is found in the atmosphere. So we'll look at the carbon cycle. But it's in the atmosphere and in fossil fuels and dissolved in carbon compounds in the ocean. So the reciprocal metabolic processes of photosynthesis and cellular respiration are mainly responsible for the cycling of carbon between biotic and abiotic worlds. So remember, we changed kind of CO2 to C6H12O6, and then we, as eaters, right, consumers, heterotrophs, will eat that and it'll get converted back to CO2. So that's a part of that whole process there. All right, so CO2 in the atmosphere, that's the idea. It goes through photosynthesis where it becomes a sugar. Primary consumer and higher level consumers will then sort of eat whatever needed to do that, and they'll do cellular respiration to put CO2 back in the environment. Whenever these little guys die, we'll have waste or death. It'll be detritus, or even the plants will do the same. Decomposers in the soil will break those down, and that will release CO2 as well. But also, fossil fuels can put more CO2 in the atmosphere than what we started with. So on a global scale, the return of CO2 to the atmosphere by cellular respiration closely balances its removal by photosynthesis, but the increased burning of wood and fossil fuels is raising the level of CO2 in the atmosphere, which is leading to our kind of global climate change. There's a lot of research on that one. Here's a good place to take a break, and then we're moving a little quickly today, but try to keep it a little short. So, take a break, chunk your notes, write some questions, come on back. So organisms require phosphorus, usually the form of phosphate ion, PO43. No, I'm just kidding. PO4 and it's 3 minus. For nucleic acids, phospholipids, ATP, and the mineral component of bones and teeth. So we need phosphate. Contrast to the carbon cycle and other major biogeochemical cycles, the phosphate cycle does not contain an atmospheric component. We get it from rocks, we get it from plants. Decomposers will help out. And it's limited in aquatic ecosystems. Okay. So there is no atmospheric component. What happens, where's our one at? We get rocks, they'll lose some phosphate, it'll end up in the soil. It'll either go into plants or it will be in solutions that are in rock here. Oop, I don't know what happened there. Let's get back to it then. Get the pen back out. All right, but it'll end up in plants. Animals will eat it and pick up the phosphate. Then they'll die. That'll go back into the soil. It'll get picked up again, and at some point it'll be lifted back up. But it's only through the earth does this one happen, not through any cycling of the atmosphere. So because phosphates are transferred from terrestrial to aquatic ecosystems much more rapidly than they're replaced, the amount of terrestrial ecosystems gradually diminishes over time. So soil erosion of land cleared for agriculture development accumulates a loss of phosphates. And farmers and gardeners have often used crushed phosphate rock or bone meal, finely ground bones from slaughtered livestock, or bat guano or poop, or droppings of seabirds. They add phosphorus to the soil, so we have to kind of get it from somewhere else. Nitrogen is our next one. So nitrogen is an ingredient for proteins and nucleic acids. It's essential to the structure and functioning of all organisms. It's crucial and often limiting plant nutrients. So this one's often limiting. It has two abiotic reservoirs. So one is the atmosphere and one is the soil. Most of it's in the atmosphere, you can see, but it's really, really hard to get to. So we actually need some things, usually some bacteria, maybe some protists that are nitrogen fixers. So nitrogen fixation is what converts into kind of our atmospheric nitrogen into a form that can be used by plants. It's often carried out by bacteria. So our next little thing will show us what it looks like, kind of, but we've got some different types of bacteria that will take the nitrogen from the environment and fix it so that way it can actually be used by plants. So we need kind of these we need these bacteria in the soil to fix it to either ammonium or nitrates, just anything that can be drawn up by the plant and then be used kind of as it's eaten by animals. So there isn't a component in the atmosphere, but unfortunately it's really, really difficult to get to. The only ones that can deal with it are nitrogen fixers. So human activities are disrupting the nitrogen cycle by adding more nitrogen to the biosphere each year than by natural processes. So combustion of fossil fuels in motor vehicles and coal-fired plants produce nitrogen oxides. So modern agriculture is another major source of nitrogen. Some nitrogen escapes the atmosphere where it forms NO2, nitrous oxide, N2O, an inert gas that lingers in the atmosphere and contributes to global warming or global climate change, more technical term. In aquatic ecosystems, primary production is limited by low nutrient levels of phosphorus and oxygen. So aquatic are kind of, watery environments are limited by phosphorus and nitrogen. So over time, standing water ecosystems gradually accumulate nutrients from decomposition and organic matter and fresh influx from the land. And the primary production increases in a process known as eutrophication. The thing about eutrophication, though, is that when it happens in lakes and rivers and coastal waters, it actually depletes oxygen levels and decreases species diversity. That almost sounded like a good thing, but when we've got too many things that can handle nitrogen and phosphorus, it throws everything out of whack, and that will take our oxygen levels down by a lot and actually decrease diversity. In many areas, phosphate pollution leading to eutrophication comes from fertilizers, pesticides, sewage treatment, and runoff. So lots of things can kind of make that one happen. All right, we can look at cyanobacteria a little bit later, but that's sort of what it would look like, is that if this one had an influx of nutrients, well, then we'd have maybe an algal bloom at this level. Nitrogen runoff in the Midwestern farms has been linked to what's called a dead zone, observed each summer in the Gulf of Mexico. Vast algal blooms extend outward where the Mississippi River ends, or where the Mississippi River deposits its nutrient-laden waters. As the algae die, decomposition of huge quantities of biomass diminishes the supply to dissolve oxygen over an area that ranges from 13,000 to 22,000 kilometers squared, or roughly 5,000 to 8,500 square miles. So a lot of kind of areas of issues. So this is where these algal blooms in winter, where they wouldn't be at, but how much they expand over the summer, because we've got all those nutrients. So humans rely upon natural ecosystems to supply fresh water and some foods, recycle nutrients, decompose waste, and regulate climate and air quality. So wetlands help buffer coastal populations against tidal waves and hurricanes. They actually reduce the impact of flooding rivers and help us filter pollutants, because there's a lot of plants that can really help in wetlands to actually filter out kind of bad water and make it a little bit better. The natural vegetation actually helps retain fertile soil and prevent landslides and mudslides. So vegetation is often really, really important. Ecosystems that we create are also essential to our well-being. So agricultural ecosystems are important and supply our food and our fibers, like our clothing, so all of your cotton clothing. They make use of ecosystem services such as control of agricultural pests by natural predators. This is actually a thing called biocontrol. So life control is what that is. And pollination of crops. We rely on nutrient cycling to maintain soil fertility and foundation for crop growth. So most of the stuff that you eat really needs to know, the farmers of the stuff that you eat really need to have a fundamental understanding of these things in order to make sure that food supplies happen. So agricultural methods introduced over the past several decades have pushed croplands beyond their natural capacity to produce food. So we get more runoff that affects freshwater and marine ecosystems. Pesticides can kill some beneficial organisms as well as pests, and clearing and cultivating exposed land to wind and water that erode the topsoil, which is really rich in nutrients. So in China, for example, overgrazing and other poor agricultural practices are turning a 900 square miles of land to an area of Rhode Island into a desert each year. Very sad. So that ends up happening a lot, these like sandstorms, and it's just terrible. So human activities also threaten many forest ecosystems and the services they provide. So forests are cut down to provide timber and fuel wood. Many people in non-industrialized countries use wood for heating and cooking. So we're threatening forests by chopping things down and utilizing them more often. But here's the best part. So the growing demand of the human population for food, fibers, and waters has largely been satisfied at the expense of other ecosystem services, but these practices cannot continue indefinitely. So we have a whole thing of sustainability, which is becoming an increased, like a more popular thing, which is exciting, but it's a goal of developing, managing, and conserving Earth's resources in ways that meet the needs of people today without compromising the future generations to meet theirs. My brother is actually really big in sustainability, and so he's vegetarian and sort of like pescatarian. He eats a little bit of fish, but he only checks to make sure that the fish is sustainable. So he is a better man than me. All right, so that's where we'll leave it for this. I moved very quickly in a it happens. So if you have any questions at all, please shoot me an email and let's work our way through it and make sure we got it.